Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have back with us today Dr. Wendy Patrick. She's an attorney and author of a book you got to pick up and take a look at and read it called Red Flags. And by the way, her website is wendypatrickphd.com, and there's a good place to connect with her. We have a lot to talk about in a few moments. Hi, Wendy. Good to see you again. How you doing?
See you, Perry. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, listen, one of the saddest stories continues to dominate the headlines, and that is what's happening to Bill Cosby. It looks like now he can be brought up on criminal charges. What's happening here?
Well, he has been, and he just had this preliminary hearing at which time he was bound over for trial. Now, what does that mean? Yeah. That means that a judge found there was enough evidence for it to go to a jury. You know, there's been a lot of discussion in the court of public opinion. I would always advise people to bring it into a court of law so they can really see how these things work. A preliminary hearing is not a jury trial. The burden is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution just has to show some evidence that the elements are present, and then the case will go forward. That's what happened most recently. So now the case will be set for trial, and at trial you will see all of the evidence be presented against Bill Cosby, and the defense will also have a chance to present. They don't have to by law, but they have an opportunity, if they so choose, to present any evidence they have as well.
All right, so some of this stuff is limited by statutes, isn't it? I mean, you can't bring up, some of it's past the statute. So in other words, some of the complaints can't be used. So how would an attorney refer to the pattern that seems to be obvious here?
Great question, Perry. It's a question that plagues all criminal attorneys when you have many counts that are barred by the statute of limitations, as we have in this case, and one count that is proceeding to trial. Because remember, there have been over 50 women that have complained in some shape or fashion that Bill Cosby has assaulted them or committed some kind of sexual misconduct. But so far, only one was committed recent enough to be prosecuted. So one of the things that the judge is going to have to decide is how many, if any, of the other instances of uncharged misconduct will be permitted to be presented to the jury. And that's going to be something that you can bet is going to be something by both the prosecution and the defense. There's going to be a lot of litigation surrounding that question because, as you point out, it's so important and is going to be so important for the jury.
How in the world do you find a juror that doesn't know that there's multiple there's multiple things going on here?
The same way you found a jury to sit on the O.J. Simpson trial. It is challenging, but possible. And that is something that actually is far more challenging in today's day and age with the advent of social media. Used to be, as I was growing up, maybe you can relate to this, I don't know, but we grew up with a big box in the living room called a TV set. We didn't get our news from Facebook, from Twitter, from Instagram, from all these other social media platforms that today's young people and even today's adult population use to get their news. It's far more challenging nowadays to find somebody that doesn't know how many women have come forward to accuse Mr. Cosby. But a judge has to find jurors that fit into that category in order to give him a fair trial.
Is it too late for plea bargaining?
Plea bargaining occurs in any case, really. It really does. But, that's something that really is it's in the purview of the lawyers closest to the case. You and I and the rest of the public are not privy to the kind of facts and circumstances that those trying the case are. So sometimes when a plea bargain is entered into, people say, oh, gosh, I can't believe it. But we don't know all the facts and circumstances that those people are considering and deciding what's fair in a case like this.
Again, rumors being what they are, but his own testimony, his own deposition seems to be working against him. Have you heard?
Yeah, pretty bad, Perry. And that's actually why, according to the lawyers involved, this case was revived. It was the 2005 deposition testimony where Mr. Cosby made the admissions that breathed new life, if you will, into this prosecution, that caused everybody to have another look at it. But remember also, that is one of the things that the judge is going to be considering is how much of that testimony, of that deposition testimony from 2005, will a jury get to hear? Very pivotal and important questions that really do determine where this case goes from here.
So sad, so sad. I'm wondering if Bill Clinton's shaking in his boots.
Well, I'll tell you, everybody who worries about a criminal past or even a past that includes misconduct worries about how much, if any of it, could come to light in a future case. So you bet that's a really good question for anybody that worries about this sort of thing. Now, we don't have the same kind of criminal allegations with everybody that's accused of misconduct, because there is a line between sexual harassment and sexual assault. Not everybody crosses that line criminally, but remember that there are civil actions for sexual harassment, as we've seen in this case, for example.
All right. I'm going to run out of time here. I want to jump over to Hillary Clinton. Of course, everything's, this is so interesting, and I could take you on for a week on this, but let me just ask you the number one question that everybody's asking. Do you think there's an indictment coming?
Border protection.
Perry, you have to excuse me. I'm on board a cruise ship, and you'll hear there's an overhead announcement. But let me answer your question anyway, if I can. One of these things with these investigations is they tend to interview everybody close to the investigation before they interview the target. So if you were to look at this particular investigation, you'll notice that they've interviewed everybody in Mrs. Clinton's inner circle, including Huma Abedin. So who's next? It's likely Mrs. Clinton herself if they choose to interview her. Now, she's ready. According to what she keeps saying, she's ready and willing to answer their questions. But are they actually going to reach out to her? That's what everybody's waiting for. All indications seem that they certainly would in order to put this investigation to rest one way or another.
Well, this is certainly unprecedented. Just the fact that we have a presidential candidate under an FBI investigation and it's being passed off by her is no big deal, a security breach. It's just unbelievable. I can't get my head around this.
Well, Perry, lots of people say it's unbelievable. Lots of people say that it's bravado on her part in assuming she's not going to be interviewed. But she's really softened some of that rhetoric in the last couple of months, perhaps because so much of the investigation has been ongoing. She's characterizing it in a little different terms. One of the things she's been doing more frequently, however, is inviting that investigation to interview her if they so choose. Now, she's saying that in the middle of a very heated presidential campaign. Remember, she's not only taking heat from Donald Trump, she's still got Bernie Sanders in the race to deal with. So given everything that's going on, she's really attempting, so it would appear, to soften her stance and her rhetoric to be more receptive to an FBI interview if they choose to speak with her. And by all indications, that could be because it seems like they do intend to speak to her just because they're interviewing, or they've concluded the interviews of her inner circle. She's next. They normally wait till the very end to interview the target. Now, Perry, what we'll be talking about after that is whether or not that interview with Mrs. Clinton is going to be determinative one way or another. In other words, do they now indict her? Do they now bring charges because she has revealed enough information? Or do they now put the investigation to rest and decide that no criminal charges are forthcoming? That's what we're all waiting for.
All right, cynicism being what it is, she gets off. But what's really at stake here is the credibility of the rule of law. At some point, the system has to be defended. And if she gets off for some kind of a quirk, I think we've lost everything.
Well, she won't be getting off if there's no charges. So it'll just be an investigation that doesn't lead to criminal charges. And lots of investigations don't, because of the standard of proof that prosecutors have to prove, even to issue a case. Remember, the burden of proof at trial, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But a prosecutor has to be convinced that the evidence is there before they even issue a case. One of the frustrations with cases like this is they've got to prove a certain mental state. Now, the general public has tried and convicted Mrs. Clinton in the court of public opinion already. But remember, it's the rules that would apply in a court of law that matter. Now, having said all that, Perry, let me also pick up on something you said. Credibility. When it comes to a presidential campaign, when you look at the candidates, credibility counts. So regardless of whether or not charges are ever brought criminally against Mrs. Clinton, her credibility has been impacted negatively, according to many of her detractors, and even been conceded by some of her supporters. That's something she's going to have to overcome in the general election. You bet Trump is going to use this investigation, whether or not it comes to criminal charges, against her.
Interesting. All right. Well, listen, I want to take advantage of your time because I know you're short here. Let me ask you this about Officer Edward Nero. Now, the verdict came out. How will this impact other officers in trials in the future?
Well, obviously there is such a thing as precedent. And, looking at different jurisdictions, cases are decided differently, rules are applied differently, different laws are chosen to apply to different actions. But how this particular case affects others remains to be seen, because the facts are so unique, as is the prosecution theory. Not to say that, prosecutors choose whatever theory is supported by the evidence, by the facts they have in front of them. But especially with the fact that there are 6 officers that were charged, and now we only have, I almost said resolutions on to, but remember the first officer, that trial resulted in a hung jury. This obviously was a bench trial, so it was decided by a judge instead of a jury. It's something that people look at, but because all of the witnesses, all of the lawyers in this case are bound by a gag order, it's impossible to know how this is going to affect those cases because the lawyers are not allowed to speak. Now, they probably wouldn't anyway. But it's interesting, remains to be seen how, if at all, this verdict will impact the others.
Was it somewhat, from your perspective, Wendy, expected? This verdict?
I don't expect anything. I've been doing this for 20 years, Perry, and there is just no way you can look at any individual case and think you're wise enough to predict what the result is going to be. And that's especially true when we don't have the benefit of sitting in court and listening to the evidence, gauging how the witnesses did on the stand, looking at how the judge appeared to be taking it all in. There are so many facts and circumstances that affect what a ruling is going to be, what a verdict is going to be, whether by a judge or by a jury. So it's just impossible, given that we're so far removed from the proceedings, both figuratively and literally in a case like this that's tried in another jurisdiction. We are continually surprised, and what we have to rely on is the judge in this case, as he did, making a very detailed ruling of why he found the way he did.
Interesting. Well, Wendy, thank you for letting us interrupt your sailing, and enjoy your time. Again, wendypatrickphd.com. Also check out her book, Red Flags. It's a great read. I'm sure you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, again by Wendy Patrick, PhD. Thank you, Wendy. Have a great time on your cruise.
Thank you, Perry, for having me.
All right, see you later. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.